A rancher finds a beaten woman and 3 newborn babies. What he does next changes the whole valley. The first winds of autumn swept across the valley like the sigh of some ancient beast, stirring the long ridges of sunburnt grass and rattling the cottonwood leaves that clung stubbornly to their branches. A faint scent of wood smoke drifted through the air, too early for winter fires, turning the sky's clear blue into something edged with memory. Out on that broad, open range, a solitary rider moved at a steady, deliberate pace, his horse placing each hoof into the dust as though it already understood the weight of the day. Silas McCrae, known across the valley as the Lonely Rancher, rode with the straight-backed silence of a man who had survived too much to be impressed by distances or storms. His hair hung in uneven strands from beneath the brim of his weather-faded hat. His coat bore the marks of long journeys and hard use. He was not a man of many words, but the land seemed to speak to him, and he listened with the obedience of an old friend. Silas hadn't planned to ride toward the abandoned cabin that morning. He meant only to check trap lines and find a young colt that had wandered too far from the herd. But the land has ways of deciding things for a man, and sometimes the wind pushes you toward what you were meant to find. He reached the ridge overlooking the hollow just as the sun bent westward. Below, a thin ribbon of smoke curled upward from a crooked chimney, too faint to be the work of a warm hearth, but too recent to be from old coals. Silas tightened his grip on the reins, his instincts sharpening like a whetstone drawn across steel. That cabin had been empty for months. Folks whispered it was cursed or haunted or simply unlucky, but whatever the reason, no one called it home anymore. Silas clicked his tongue to his horse and rode down the slope. The cabin appeared more broken the closer he came. The roof sagged like a weary old man leaning on a cane. The porch boards bowed inward. A pair of children's carved wooden toys lay scattered near the steps, half buried in the dirt, worn by wind and neglect. The open door swung on one hinge with a slow, desperate creak. Silas dismounted, boots crunching through layers of dust. He stepped carefully. Men who lived alone learned caution not from fear but from necessity. Inside, the air smelled of old blood, sickness, and something faintly sour. A chair lay overturned. A clay jug had shattered on the floor. Dark stains trailed across the boards toward the open door, like the dragging mark of someone crawling. He followed the trail outside. There, slumped on the sagging porch, wrapped in a tattered blanket, sat a woman whose bruised face bore the colors of pain, purple and blue, fading yellow near the edges. Her hair was tangled, matted with dried sweat. She breathed in short, shallow bursts. Beside her lay a small wooden cradle, and inside it, wrapped in strips of old cloth, were 3 newborn baby girls. Small, fragile, crying softly in the fading afternoon light. Silas froze. For a long moment he simply watched. The woman's cracked lips trembled. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing the deep brown of river mud after heavy rain. "You hurt," Silas said quietly, "because men of his kind spoke truth before anything else." She blinked slowly, focusing on his face as if startled that kindness still walked the earth. You're the rancher, from the ridge." Her voice rasped, like gravel dragged across stone. "That's what they call me." Silas knelt beside her, his shadow falling across the cradle to shield the infants from the sun. "What happened here?" She swallowed, her throat tightening painfully. "They came. There were many. Sheriff's men, a few rangers, and my husband." Her eyes filled with something sharp, like broken glass dipped in grief. "They said 3 girls were a curse, that the Lord was punishing him. He beat me, told me I brought shame." Silas felt the old anger kindle deep in his chest, the kind of anger men don't shout about but carry like an iron brand. His jaw tightened. "Your name?" he asked gently. "Mara," she whispered. "Mara Whit." Silas looked at the 3 tiny faces nestled together, their breaths rapid and uncertain. 3 little miracles left to die, He stood slowly, made his decision as firm as stone. "I'm taking you with me," he said. "You and the babies." Mara shook her head weakly. "I can't go. They'll follow. My husband, Gideon, he'll kill me." Silas slipped an arm beneath her shoulders, steadying her. "He'll have to go through me first." Her breath broke in a sob, quiet, disbelieving. "I'm nothing but trouble." "You're alive," Silas said, "and that's reason enough." He lifted the cradle carefully as though it were sacred. Each baby whimpered softly, one stretching her tiny hand as if reaching for something unseen. Mara, unable to stand on her own, leaned on Silas as they walked toward his horse. The journey to Silas's ranch was slow. Mara grew fainter with each step. The babies cried for warmth and food. Silas walked with the cradle in both arms, leading his horse by the reins, his boots dragging through the dust like anchors. Neighbors spotted them along the ridge. Whispers spread like wildfire. Silas McCrae found a woman half dead. "He's bringing triplets. Her husband's a madman. There'll be trouble yet." By the time they reached the ranch, the sun had slipped low, staining the sky with rust-red streaks. Silas carried the babies inside first. His home, small, sturdy, smelling of wood smoke, suddenly felt warmer with those soft breaths filling its walls. He returned for Mara next, lifting her gently and laying her on his own bed. She winced in pain. "You're safe," he murmured. "Rest." But rest would not come easy. The next morning, word came like a plague. Sheriff Malone was riding up the lane with 2 deputies. Silas stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Malone reined in his horse, his badge gleaming like a threat. "McCrae," he called, "I hear you got something that ain't yours, Burr." Silas didn't bother hiding his disdain. "A woman beaten half to death ain't property, Burr." Malone squinted. "Her husband wants her back. Law says..." "Burr." "Law says no man beats a woman like he's breaking a horse." Silas cut in sharply. Mara stood inside, just visible behind the screen door, holding one baby. The other 2 slept in the cradle beside her. Malone followed Silas's gaze and saw the bruises. His smirk faltered. "That ain't my concern," he muttered, though softer now. "Just bring her out." Silas stepped closer, the porch creaking under his weight. "You'll get no one from this house on threats alone. If you want her, bring a warrant." Malone's jaw clenched. "You're making enemies you don't need." "Never did need 'em," Silas said. "But I don't fear 'em." After a long, heated stare, Malone turned his horse. "Hale'll come for her," he warned. "And he won't knock polite like I did." Silas watched them disappear. The valley felt quieter once they were gone, but an unease lingered like smoke from a dying fire. Mara stepped out onto the porch, the baby resting against her shoulder, her face pale. "You shouldn't have done that." Silas looked at her, something soft but unbroken in his eyes. "I'd do it again." That night Mara couldn't sleep. She told Silas of Gideon Hale, his cruelty, his temper, how he believed girls were curses that drained luck from a man's blood. She told him how the town whispered that Gideon's word was worth more than a woman's life. Silas listened in the dim lamplight, jaw set, hands tight on his coffee mug. Over the next days, Mara healed slowly. Silas fed the babies goat's milk with a cloth and held them when their cries shook the walls. He built a small rocking cradle for them, smoothing the wood with patient hands. The house grew brighter with the sound of small voices, tiny whimpers that softened even Silas's hardened spirit. But peace never lasted long on the frontier. One night, under a pale moon, Silas heard hooves thundering in the distance. He stepped outside with his rifle, eyes narrowing as 5 riders approached. Gideon Hale leading them, eyes wild, angry, and drunk on vengeance. The men dismounted, guns drawn. "Mara," Gideon bellowed, "come out! You're my wife." Mara, inside, clutched all 3 babies close, trembling. Silas stepped forward. She ain't going anywhere with you. Gideon sneered. You want a fight, rancher? I want justice, Silas replied. Gideon fired the first shot. The night exploded into smoke and flame. Silas ducked behind the wagon, rifle cracking with controlled precision. Bullets tore through fence posts. Mara shielded the babies inside the doorway as splinters rained down around her. One outlaw fell. Another dropped his pistol and screamed. Gideon caught a bullet grazing his arm and stumbled back, wide-eyed. You'll regret this, McCrae, he shouted, retreating with what remained of his men. This ain't over, Burr. When the dust settled, Silas rushed to the house. Mara shook, tears streaking down her bruised cheeks as she held the babies close. It's over tonight, he said softly, touching her shoulder. You're safe for now. But both of them knew Gideon Hale was the kind of man who didn't forget humiliation. And he would return. The morning after the gunfight arrived with a strange, heavy stillness. The land around Silas's ranch looked as if it were holding on to the last shreds of the night. Broken fence rails, bullet-scarred posts, dust still unsettled in the yard. Silas stood near the porch, rifle hanging loosely at his side, his eyes sweeping the ridge for any sign of returning riders. He didn't trust quiet mornings. Too often they followed a storm only to hide another one coming. Inside the house, the 3 newborn girls whimpered softly. Mara knelt beside them, her face pale and worn. Humming a lullaby she could barely keep steady. She still flinched at the memory of gunshots, at the sound of men shouting her name like a curse. Every breath tightened the bruises on her ribs, but she forced herself to keep moving. She wasn't afraid of death anymore. She was afraid of losing the tiny miracles sleeping beside her. Silas stepped in, placing his hat on the table. Mara looked up, worry tightening her fingers around the blanket. Is he gone? She whispered. For now, Silas answered, but Gideon Hale's not the sort to give up. Wounded men usually come back meaner. Mara swallowed, glancing at the cradle where the babies wriggled softly. He'll try again. He always does. Silas crouched beside her, checking each newborn with gentle hands. He'll find a man waiting for him this time. She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down. I don't want you hurt because of me. That ain't your decision, Silas said. If trouble comes, I'll meet it. By midday, the valley already buzzed with rumors. Some neighbors rode out to Silas's ranch to see the truth for themselves. Old Mr. Calloway was the first, grumbling as he dismounted under the cottonwoods. Heard you had a hell of a night, he said. Silas nodded. Hale came, brought others. Calloway let out a low whistle. Men like him never did have shame. You're walking through a hornet's nest now, Silas. Been in one before, Silas answered. Calloway looked toward the house. One of the babies began crying a thin, sharp sound. Calloway's eyes widened slightly. Triplets. Well, that explains the fire in Hale's belly. Fool man thinks luck comes only in trousers. He mounted his horse again. If he comes back, you shout. You saved that woman. You deserve better trouble than him. Silas didn't respond. He never did enjoy thanks, but he recognized good intent when he heard it. Later that day, Sheriff Malone rode up the lane with 2 deputies. Unlike before, he didn't swagger or smirk. He looked older, heavier with guilt. We gotta talk, McCrae, he said quietly. Dead men on your land, bar. They drew first, Silas replied, bar. Malone nodded. I know. Folks saw the smoke from town. Still gotta do this proper. Law's thin out here, but it's all we got. Mara stepped into the doorway, holding one baby while the other 2 slept behind her. When Malone saw her face, the bruises, the hollow fear, he removed his hat. Burr, you didn't deserve what happened, he said. She shook her head. They came to kill us, Burr. Malone stiffened. You'll need to testify. We're taking this before Judge Whitlock. If Gideon Hale's guilty, he'll answer for it, Burr. Silas crossed his arms. And will that keep him away from her, Burr? It'll keep him locked up long enough to show folks what he is, Malone replied. For the next several days, statements were taken. Witnesses came reluctantly, glancing over their shoulders like truth might bite them. But Gideon had shown too much ugliness, too openly, for them to remain silent. One neighbor spoke of seeing him drag Mara by the hair. Another admitted hearing him boast that girls ain't worth feedin'. Within a week, a warrant was issued. Gideon Hale was arrested after a drunken fight in the saloon, shouting that the valley had turned on him. On the day of the trial, the courthouse was packed tighter than a cattle chute. Sweat mixed with dust in the hot air as folks whispered about the spectacle. Silas and Mara sat in the front row. Mara wore a clean dress he'd bought her in town. Silas sat steady beside her, hat resting on his knee. Gideon was dragged in, hands shackled. He scanned the room with eyes like rusted nails, sneering when he saw Mara with Silas. "They ain't even your blood," he spat. "Them girls is dead weight." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mara looked down, swallowing hard. Silas's hand tightened on his hat brim. Witness after witness spoke. Even Malone admitted he'd suspected Hale of more than liquor trouble. Gideon tried to interrupt, shouting, lying, blaming the devil, the moon, and Mara herself. Judge Whitlock finally slammed his gavel. "Enough. Gideon Hale, by testimony and evidence, you are guilty." Gideon screamed curses as he was dragged out. Mara trembled, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. Silas placed a hand over hers. "It's done," he said softly. She nodded, though relief always comes slow to someone who's lived in fear. Back at the ranch, life changed in gentle, patient steps. Mara began to heal. Silas built a new cradle, sanding it smooth so the triplets wouldn't scratch their hands. Mara stitched tiny dresses. The girls grew stronger each day. Anna, the firstborn, opened her eyes wide and calm whenever Silas spoke. Liza, the second, had lungs that could wake a town. Ruth, the smallest, curled her fingers around Silas's thumb like she never meant to let go. Silas learned how to warm goat's milk without burning it, how to rock 3 babies at once, how to soothe their cries with the soft hum of an old trail song. Mara watched him sometimes with a look he pretended not to notice, part gratitude, part disbelief, part something warmer. Fences broke, storms rolled in, cattle wandered, but the house was no longer empty. Nights filled with soft cries and sleepy laughter, days filled with mending, feeding, sewing, rocking. The valley whispered less and less about scandal and more about resilience. One evening, long after the trial, Silas sat on the porch sharpening a knife. Mara stepped out, Ruth sleeping on her shoulder. The sunset painted her face in amber light. "You saved us," she said quietly. Silas didn't look up. "I did what any man ought." "No," she said gently. "Not every man would." He met her eyes. Something fragile and deep passed between them. He cleared his throat. "You deserve gentler company than mine." "A gentle man didn't come for me," she replied. "A good man did." Silas lowered the knife. "And what do you want, Mara?" Her voice shook slightly. "I want to stay." Those 3 words broke something open in him. He nodded once, slow and certain. "Then stay." Seasons turned. The triplets crawled, walked, ran. Anna followed Silas around the ranch with wide, curious eyes. Liza climbed everything she could find. Ruth stayed close to her mother's skirts. Neighbors began stopping by more often. Some came for help. Some came simply to see the girls. Mara's kindness spread through the valley like spring sunlight, quiet but warming everything it touched. She nursed sick calves, delivered pies to older ranchers, stitched torn jackets. Silas's home slowly became a place people spoke of with respect instead of mystery. Mara and Silas married under the cottonwood tree one soft spring morning. The triplets held wildflowers and giggled through the whole ceremony. The valley gathered not out of curiosity but affection. Years passed. The girls grew into lively, stubborn daughters. Silas taught them to ride, to rope, to read weather, to treat the land kindly. Mara taught them courage that didn't need noise to be strong. Silas grew older, his hair silvering, his steps slower. Yet he still spent evenings on the porch with Mara beside him, their hands intertwined. Sometimes he'd laugh, a sound many had forgotten he was capable of, and say, "I reckon I wasn't meant to be lonely after all." One winter night, as snow fell softly against the windows, Silas passed quietly in his sleep. Mara held his hand until morning, her tears falling steadily but gently. The triplets, now young women, gathered around her, their grief echoing hers. They buried Silas on the ridge overlooking the ranch. Mara planted a cottonwood at his headstone. It grew strong, stretching toward the sky, its leaves whispering of all the seasons he had lived through. In time, folks in the valley told his story often, not as a tale of gunfights or heroics, but of a man who saw injustice and chose compassion. They said he had once been the lonely rancher, but he died anything but lonely. He died surrounded by the family he'd saved and the love he'd earned. The valley never forgot the day Silas McCrae found a beaten woman and 3 newborn baby girls, and decided that doing what was right mattered more than doing what was easy. And because of that one choice, a home was built, a family was born, and a man once known for solitude became forever remembered for love.